Imagine you could approach problems in life and work like a world-class economist or a master problem solver. What if you could detach yourself from conventional wisdom, challenge the status quo, and find solutions that others miss? Think Like a Freak invites readers to embrace curiosity, simplicity, and unconventional thinking to tackle everyday challenges. Written by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner, the creators of the wildly popular Freakonomics series, this book provides a toolkit for seeing the world differently, asking smarter questions, and solving problems with clarity and creativity. At its core, thinking like a freak means unlearning traditional ways of approaching challenges and adopting a mindset driven by data, evidence, and a willingness to explore the uncomfortable truths. It's about seeing beyond the obvious and embracing the power of inquiry. With fascinating stories, real-world examples, and actionable insights, Levitt and Dubner take us on a journey to uncover what it means to think like a freak and how to do it. Chapter 1. What does it mean to think like a freak? The opening chapter lays the groundwork for the book's central thesis, the power of unconventional thinking. The authors begin by exploring the limits of traditional problem solving, where people are often constrained by societal norms, fear of failure, and the desire to appear competent. They argue that stepping outside these boundaries is the key to tackling problems effectively. One of the first lessons is to ask better questions. Instead of jumping straight to solutions, thinking like a freak means taking a step back and reevaluating the problem itself. They illustrate this with the example of a British company that wanted to combat high absenteeism among factory workers. Instead of offering typical incentives like bonuses or stricter rules, they dug deeper and discovered that offering employees a breakfast sandwich led to dramatic improvements in attendance. This unexpected solution came from challenging the assumption that money was the only motivator. Levitt and Dubner also emphasize the importance of admitting what you don't know. Many people hesitate to acknowledge their ignorance, fearing it might make them seem less competent. Too often, solutions are hampered by our insistence on being right or clinging to our moral biases. By approaching issues with curiosity rather than condemnation, we can find solutions that are innovative and practical. Chapter 2. The 3 hardest words in the English language. In this chapter, Levitt and Dubner focus on 3 simple yet profoundly challenging words. I don't know. They argue that admitting ignorance is not a sign of weakness, but a gateway to discovering real solutions. Unfortunately, society often stigmatizes uncertainty, encouraging people to bluff, assume, or guess instead of facing the reality of what they don't know. Admitting I don't know is a powerful tool because it opens up the opportunity for discovery and growth. They highlight a striking example from the world of professional soccer, where a goalkeeper who admits they don't know the direction of a penalty kick has a better chance of success by staying in the center rather than guessing aside. The authors provide another intriguing example from the financial world. During the 2008 global economic crash, many experts and economists were unwilling to admit they didn't foresee the crisis or fully understand its causes. This reluctance to embrace I don't know fueled public mistrust and compounded the problem, as experts clung to theories that didn't align with the unfolding reality. By contrast, the rare individuals who admitted they didn't have all the answers were the ones who began uncovering the real issues. Acknowledging ignorance allows for deeper inquiry. Instead of defending preconceived ideas, it prompts curiosity and the search for better data. They use the example of the early days of medical science, where admitting ignorance about diseases like scurvy or cholera led to groundbreaking discoveries. For instance, sailors plagued by scurvy were cured only when researchers dared to rethink traditional assumptions and tested new ideas, like adding citrus fruits to their diet. Levitt and Dubner also challenge readers to resist the pressure to always have an answer. In business, education, and personal life, we are often conditioned to provide immediate responses. This tendency stifles creativity and reinforces flawed decision-making. They describe a psychological phenomenon called overconfidence bias, where people believe they know more than they actually do. This bias leads to poor decisions and prevents meaningful progress. The chapter closes with a practical takeaway. When confronted with a difficult question or problem, start by asking yourself, What don't I know about this? Instead of relying on assumptions, seek out evidence, ask unconventional questions, and don't shy away from uncertainty. By embracing I don't know, you open the door to real solutions and begin thinking like a freak. Chapter 3. What's your problem? In this chapter, Levitt and Dubner delve into the art of problem definition, asserting that the way a problem is framed determines the success of the solution. They argue that people often fail to solve their problems effectively because they're too focused on addressing symptoms rather than root causes. Thinking like a freak requires stepping back, questioning assumptions, and reframing the problem entirely. The authors use the example of Takeru Kobayashi, a competitive eater who revolutionized the field by shattering world records. When training for the Nathan's famous hot dog eating contest, Kobayashi didn't ask himself the typical question, how can I eat more hot dogs? Instead, he reframed the challenge as, how can I make eating hot dogs easier? This subtle shift in perspective led him to experiment with breaking hot dogs in half, separating buns and soaking them in water, and employing efficient swallowing techniques. By redefining the problem, Kobayashi doubled the previous world record. The chapter emphasizes the danger of tackling the wrong problem due to deeply ingrained assumptions. Levitt and Dubner illustrate this with a story about Nigerian email scammers. Most people wonder why scammers send such obviously fraudulent emails, filled with spelling errors and far-fetched claims. But the reality is that these errors are intentional. The scammers are filtering out anyone who is skeptical, targeting only the most gullible victims who are more likely to fall for the scam. The seemingly nonsensical emails are an ingenious solution to a carefully defined problem. Levitt and Dubner also discuss how organizations often struggle because they don't define their problems clearly. They recount the story of the U.S. military's efforts to curb improvised explosive device, IED, attacks in Iraq. Initial solutions focused on building better armor for vehicles. However, this didn't address the root cause, the placement of IEDs. It wasn't until they started analyzing where and how these devices were deployed that they began to anticipate and prevent attacks more effectively. The key takeaway from this chapter is to keep asking, what's the real problem here? The authors recommend digging deeper by repeatedly asking why until you uncover the true issue. Take a problem you're facing and rethink it entirely. Are you trying to solve the wrong problem? Are your assumptions clouding your ability to see clearly? By redefining the problem, you can unlock a whole new world of possibilities. Chapter 4. Like a bad dye job. The truth is in roots. This section delves into the importance of addressing root causes rather than symptoms when solving problems. Often, people focus on surface-level solutions that provide temporary relief but fail to create lasting change. The authors argue that digging deeper to uncover the true source of an issue is crucial, even if it requires uncomfortable truths or inconvenient efforts. To illustrate, the authors recount a story about a city struggling with high employee turnover in its sanitation department. Initially, the city increased wages, assuming money was the primary motivator. However, the turnover persisted. Digging deeper, the city discovered that poor management practices, including inadequate communication and lack of recognition, were driving dissatisfaction. By addressing these root issues, training supervisors and improving workplace culture, turnover rates finally decreased. Another striking example involves the healthcare system. A hospital experiencing frequent medication errors initially blamed staff carelessness. However, a deeper investigation revealed that the layout of medication stations and unclear labeling were the real culprits. Redesigning the system reduced errors significantly, showcasing the power of tackling underlying causes rather than assigning blame. This principle extends beyond professional settings. In personal finances, for instance, people often address the symptom of overspending by setting stricter budgets, yet fail to address deeper habits or emotional triggers behind their spending. Similarly, in relationships, couples may argue over recurring issues without exploring underlying insecurities or unmet needs fueling the conflict. The authors emphasize that finding the root cause requires curiosity and humility. It's not about assigning blame, but understanding the larger system or behavior driving the problem. By thinking critically and questioning assumptions, you can move beyond quick fixes and create meaningful, long-term solutions. Chapter 5. Think Like a Child. Levitt and Dubner shift gears in this chapter, encouraging readers to embrace the curiosity and creativity of a child when tackling problems. Thinking like a child involves questioning the obvious, ignoring societal conventions, and exploring solutions with playful imagination. While adults are often bound by rules and risk aversion, children approach challenges with fresh perspectives, unburdened by limitations. The authors illustrate this concept with an example from the world of innovation: the development of the microplane, now a kitchen staple for grating zest in cheese. Originally designed as a woodworking tool, the microplane was reimagined for culinary purposes when a home cook borrowed one from her toolbox. This unconventional thinking, repurposing something from a completely different field, parallels the unorthodox creativity children naturally exhibit. Levitt and Dubner also highlight the importance of asking naive questions, even if they seem foolish. Children excel at this because they're not afraid of judgment. One story involves the transportation industry, where companies struggled with expensive delays caused by freight unloading inefficiencies. Instead of asking how to speed up the process, someone dared to ask, why are trucks being loaded and unloaded in the first place? This led to the creation of container shipping, an innovation that revolutionized global trade by standardizing containers across transport modes. Thinking like a child also means embracing playfulness. For example, when the famous ad agency Ogilvy and Mather faced a creative block while developing a campaign for Maxwell House coffee, they experimented with a childlike approach. They turned to brainstorming while sipping coffee and playing games. This led to the creation of the iconic slogan, "Good to the last drop." The process illustrates how childlike experimentation can produce remarkable breakthroughs. Another critical aspect of thinking like a child is the ability to ignore social norms and question authority. Levitt and Dubner recount the story of a young girl who famously asked, "Why do we need homework?" Her simple, candid inquiry sparked a discussion about the value and purpose of homework in education systems worldwide. This story underscores that questioning ingrained practices often leads to progress. The chapter emphasizes that as adults, we lose much of this flexibility due to fear of failure or ridicule. To counteract this, the authors suggest cultivating a sense of wonder and not taking yourself too seriously. Whether it's by asking silly questions, trying something unconventional, or refusing to accept the way things have always been done, adopting a child's mindset can unleash powerful problem-solving skills. Chapter 6. Like Giving Candy to a Baby. This chapter delves into the art of incentives, revealing why they are crucial yet often misunderstood. Incentives, the authors explain, are not just about money or tangible rewards. They are about motivation at its core. The right incentive can encourage extraordinary behavior, but the wrong one can backfire spectacularly. A fascinating example illustrates this point through the daycare experiment in Haifa, Israel. Parents were consistently late picking up their children, inconveniencing daycare staff. In an attempt to curb this behavior, the daycare implemented a fine for tardiness. Surprisingly, this had the opposite effect. Parents began arriving even later, viewing the fine as a fee for extra childcare rather than a penalty. This story demonstrates how poorly designed incentives can have unintended consequences. The chapter also highlights how different people are motivated by different incentives. For example, a study on blood donations found that when people were offered money to donate, participation rates actually dropped. Why? The monetary reward undermined the altruistic motive that drove many donors. By contrast, offering small tokens of appreciation, like snacks or badges, increased participation because it aligned with the donor's sense of goodwill rather than commodifying their generosity. Understanding human psychology is critical in designing effective incentives. One of the most striking stories involves the healthcare industry, where financial incentives were used to encourage doctors to perform more preventative care. While seemingly logical, this created ethical dilemmas, as some physicians began prioritizing profit over patient well-being. The story underscores the need for thoughtful incentive structures that balance desired outcomes with unintended consequences. The authors also explore the concept of hidden incentives. These are motivations that people may not even be aware of, but which significantly influence their actions. For instance, when supermarkets introduced loyalty programs, customers started shopping more frequently, not just for discounts, but because the programs played on a psychological desire for progress and achievement. Shoppers felt rewarded for their loyalty and continued to chase points, even if the financial benefits were marginal. At its core, the chapter challenges readers to rethink how they motivate others and themselves. Incentives aren't one size fits all, and getting them right requires creativity, empathy, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Whether you're managing employees, raising children, or designing public policy, crafting effective incentives means considering both the obvious and the hidden motivators driving people's actions. Chapter 7. What do King Solomon and David Lee Roth have in common? This chapter explores the art of using indirect methods to uncover hidden truths, drawing parallels between King Solomon's famous biblical judgment and David Lee Roth's ingenious backstage contract requirements. The central idea is that sometimes the best way to understand a situation or reveal someone's true intentions is by crafting scenarios where behavior speaks louder than words. The story of King Solomon dividing a baby to identify the true mother highlights the power of indirect questioning. Rather than asking the women to prove their claim, Solomon devised a situation where the real mother's genuine love would become evident. He proposed a seemingly simple but cunning solution. He ordered that the baby be cut in half, with each woman receiving half of the child. His reasoning was that this would settle the dispute in a way that was fair to both women. Of course, the idea of killing the baby was not the goal. It was simply a test. When the first woman heard this proposal, she immediately offered to give up her claim to the child in order to save its life. She begged Solomon to give the baby to the other woman instead, revealing her identity as the true mother. The second woman, however, agreed to the plan of dividing the child, showing no concern for the baby's well-being. Similarly, rock star David Lee Roth, known for his eccentricities, included an unusual clause in his band Van Halen's tour contracts: a demand for a bowl of M&Ms with all the brown candies removed. While this seemed like a diva request, its real purpose was to ensure that venues paid attention to the fine details of the contract. If the band found brown M&Ms backstage, they suspected other, more critical safety or technical details might have been overlooked. The authors emphasize the usefulness of creating situations or tests where actions reveal intentions, effort, or understanding. For instance, in hiring, instead of relying solely on resumes or interviews, some companies assign projects that mimic real job tasks. This approach allows candidates to demonstrate their skills and adaptability in a practical context. Similarly, in relationships, asking direct questions may not always yield honest answers, as people often say what they think you want to hear. However, observing behavior, how someone reacts to stress, treats service staff, or handles conflict, can reveal deeper truths about their character. The chapter underscores that indirect approaches require creativity and insight, but can be a powerful way to avoid deception or misunderstandings. By structuring scenarios that reveal intentions naturally, you can gain a clearer picture of reality, whether in negotiations, problem-solving, or personal interactions. Chapter 8. How to Persuade People Who Don't Want to Be Persuaded. In this chapter, the authors explore the challenge of persuasion, particularly how to persuade people who are adamantly resistant to change or new ideas. Traditional methods of persuasion often rely on logic, evidence, and reasoning. However, the authors argue that these tactics are often ineffective when dealing with individuals who are not open to being persuaded. Instead, they suggest a different approach, one that shifts from confrontation to understanding and from logic to emotion. The central idea here is that when people have made up their minds or developed a strong opinion, they are likely to cling to it, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The psychological principle of confirmation bias, the tendency to search for or interpret information in a way that confirms existing beliefs, plays a big role in this. The more we push against someone's deeply held belief, the more they entrench themselves in it. One of the key strategies the authors present is the importance of understanding where the person is coming from. Instead of trying to force your perspective onto them, the idea is to first listen, empathize, and find common ground. By showing that you understand their viewpoint, you create a foundation of trust. This can lower their defenses and make them more willing to consider alternative viewpoints. Persuasion becomes less about confrontation and more about gently guiding someone toward a different perspective, step by step. A great example is a story about a campaign to convince people to donate blood. Initially, the campaign's direct approach didn't work. People weren't convinced by statistics or appeals to their sense of duty. However, when the campaigners shifted their approach and told stories of personal connections, like a daughter who received a blood transfusion after a car accident, it created an emotional connection. People were much more likely to donate after hearing personal stories that made the issue feel real and urgent. The authors also discuss the idea of framing, presenting information in a way that aligns with the other person's values. For example, if you want to persuade someone to become more environmentally conscious, instead of simply highlighting the scientific facts about climate change, you could frame the conversation around their personal values, like their love of nature, their concern for future generations, or their desire to reduce waste. When persuasion aligns with personal values, it becomes far more effective. Ultimately, the chapter teaches that persuasion is not about trying to defeat the other person or win the argument. It's about making them feel understood and guiding them through emotional connection and reframing toward new conclusions. By appealing to both their emotions and their values, we can make our ideas more palatable, even to those who don't want to be persuaded. Chapter 9. The Upside of Quitting. In this final chapter, the authors delve into the often misunderstood concept of quitting. In a society that values perseverance and never giving up, quitting is often seen as a failure or a sign of weakness. However, the authors argue that quitting, when done strategically and at the right time, can actually be an incredibly valuable and smart decision. The central idea here is that sometimes, in order to move forward and find success, we need to recognize when something isn't working and be willing to quit. The fear of quitting comes from a place of sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to continue investing in something simply because we've already invested a lot of time, effort, or money, even when it's no longer serving us. The authors emphasize that quitting doesn't mean failure. Rather, it's often a necessary step in the process of finding better opportunities and making progress. One example the authors use is of a person who is working in a job they're not passionate about. The person might stick with the job, even though it's draining their energy and preventing them from pursuing something they truly care about. By quitting that job and taking a leap into something new, they might experience short-term discomfort, but in the long run, they could end up much happier and more successful. The key is to quit with purpose, not out of frustration or impulsivity, but after careful consideration of the costs and benefits. The chapter also discusses how quitting can be a strategic way to pivot. Successful entrepreneurs, athletes, and individuals often quit certain paths to redirect their efforts toward more promising or fulfilling endeavors. For instance, Steve Jobs famously quit his position at Apple before returning years later to turn the company around. His initial departure, seen by many as a failure, was ultimately part of the process that led to some of his most successful ventures. Moreover, the authors discuss how the act of quitting can free up mental and emotional space for new opportunities and better ideas. Quitting allows us to stop wasting resources on the wrong pursuits and instead focus on what really matters. They challenge the idea that persistence is always the key to success, suggesting that knowing when to quit and when to start fresh can be just as important, if not more so. In the context of decision-making, quitting can also help avoid the trap of the escalation of commitment. This is when people continue down a path or stay in a relationship, even when they know it's not working, because they've already invested too much. Recognizing when to quit helps break that cycle and redirects energy towards something more productive. The chapter highlights that quitting strategically can actually be a path to greater success. The ability to recognize when something isn't working and to move on is a valuable skill that can open the door to new opportunities and allow us to grow in unexpected ways. So while our culture often emphasizes the importance of persistence, the upside of quitting encourages us to see quitting not as an end, but as an intelligent decision to pursue better options and ultimately lead us toward greater success. This wraps up the book, Think Like a Freak, where the authors encourage us to break free from conventional thinking and challenge the way we approach problems. The journey through the book offers valuable insights into how we can question societal norms, look at problems from unique angles, and ultimately make better decisions. By embracing curiosity, creativity, and the willingness to fail, we open ourselves up to new opportunities and solutions that we may have overlooked before. At the core of this book is the belief that thinking differently, thinking like a freak, is not about being odd or rebellious for the sake of it, but about approaching challenges with an open mind, asking tough questions, and not being afraid to go against the grain. The authors show us that the most innovative and effective solutions often come from the most unexpected sources. So whether it's in business, personal life, or any area where we seek to make better decisions, adopting this mindset can have transformative effects. The key takeaway is that we shouldn't settle for the way things are. By questioning assumptions, trying new things, and learning from our failures, we unlock paths to success that we might never have thought possible. Remember, every breakthrough starts with the courage to ask, what if? So go ahead, think like a freak, and watch as new possibilities unfold before you. Thank you so much for listening and joining us. If you enjoyed the audiobook, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more book summaries that help you expand your mind. Drop a comment below to let us know which book you'd like us to explore next, and we'll consider it for our upcoming episodes. We look forward to bringing you more valuable content right here on Page by Page. Until next time, keep learning and growing.